Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the third installment of our year-long series celebrating the Phantom Menace. But first, Jay, remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
You got it, Dennis. We are very conveniently found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is line, signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So to preview this discussion without reciting this discussion, it's a fun 10-minute segment. We're doing a really good job this year of sticking to about 10 minutes. And so this one goes from about 21 minutes and 34 seconds to 31 minutes and 41 seconds. And we get off into all kinds of fun little tangents and discussions. And this one, our guest is Kara DJ from Into a Larger World fanzine and podcast. So yeah, this is going to be a fun discussion.
Absolutely. Let's do it. So now for this segment of the Phantom Menace 25th anniversary of the podcast, we are being joined by Kara DJ from Into a Larger World fanzine and podcast. So Kara, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. So glad you could make it for this discussion.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and so we've had a chance to chat before. So you've been on an episode of World Between Worlds here on Podcast Stardust, and then I was also a very special guest of yours as well, and I consider myself very special to be on there. And so just talking about my fan experiences with Celebration and fandom in general. So I thank you once again, because that was tons of fun.
It was such a good chat. It was so much fun to hear your whole fandom story, and I so much stuff I didn't know about you, which was really great. And yeah, thanks again for coming on there too.
Well, of course. So tonight we have this segment of the Phantom Menace, and Dennis, I'll throw it over to you so you can explain the time frame, the timestamp, I should say, of the segment, and set it up for us.
Well, before we get into that, let's get into our questions for our guests that we usually do for each one of the episodes. So we're starting off our questions with the Phantom Menace with, tell us about your first experience seeing the Phantom Menace. Do you remember where you saw it, who you were with, and what your initial reaction was?
I'll be honest, I was 8. Mm-hmm. So I honestly don't remember. I have a movie stub for it in one of my scrapbooks. So I saw it in the movie theater, but I don't have much memory of it. I know I saw it a ton of times on video, but I never remember having really strong feelings about it, honestly, until this is way late, but I believe it was 2017, I read the novelization and I hadn't seen it in a really long time. And reading the novelization, I honestly credit that to being one of the things that fully sucked me into Star Wars madness, because I just loved that book. And then I watched the movie again, and then I read the other prequel novelizations. I haven't finished Revenge of the Sith, which I know is the best one. But anyway, but yeah, I love the Phantom Menace novelization. I actually have been dying to read it again. But yeah, that's probably my best memories. I have more concrete memories of episodes 2 and 3 in the theater, but for 1, it's just kind of episode 1's just been one of those things that's just been around for as long as I can remember, I think.
Oh, that's cool though, because it's with you being younger than Dennis and I, as far as your entry point to Star Wars, if you will. It's always really cool to hear the differences in that, generational kind of time frame between what we remember growing up in our introduction to Star Wars and then what you remember. And that novelization by Terry Brooks is definitely one that we had talked about several times, and how it not only enhances the movie, but it also really adds to it as well. So
Mhm.
are you planning on going to see the re-release in the theater here in May? Are you fortunate enough to be able to have a theater nearby that you're going to be able to snag a viewing?
I am pretty sure. If not, I'm willing to drive very far because I really, really want to see it on the big screen. And especially just, I feel like maybe we'll get into this a little bit with our segment we're talking about, but I feel like the sounds of this movie are
Oh, yeah.
just insane. Like just Ben Burt just batting 10 million. And
Mhm.
I just really want to hear those on like a big screen, sound system.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, that THX, just feeling it in your chest kind of a thing, for
Definitely.
sure. And being someone that's so into, the fandom aspect of this, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of pre-movie hoopla, if you know what I mean. And I know when, my teacher friend and I just went to see the re-release of Return of the Jedi last spring, and there was cosplayers, and of course I was one of them, so I can imagine that that would be the case, and I can see you completely just loving every second of that. So hopefully you do get a chance to take that in and get all the memorabilia, of the re-release and whatnot. So cool.
So,
Definitely.
who's on the cover of your copy of the Phantom Menace novelization?
The one I have, I believe, is Anakin.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine's Padme.
And mine is Obi-Wan. So,
Oh,
Oh my gosh. We need to like get pictures of those each and just,
oh,
I'll just edit them all together so we can have them. I didn't even realize that there were different covers. How did I
yeah,
not know this?
there was 4. There's the Padme, the Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Darth Maul, I believe,
right.
covers.
What?
Right. And Qui-Gon's on the back cover of mine. I can't remember who's on the back of the other ones.
Oh my gosh. I guess I never really paid attention to the back so much.
Right.
But that
Well,
is
my copy's
wow.
sitting right next to me, so it's easy for me to check.
Okay.
But
Mine's in the living room. Too funny. Wow. All right, Kara. So moving on to our next question here. What is your favorite scene from The Phantom Menace?
Oh, okay. I'm thinking. It's hard not to say the pod race just because it's such a feat of like insanity, graphic, visual madness, and the music and the sound. And so it's hard not to say that. But honestly, even more than a favorite scene, I have like a favorite moment,
Mhm.
which is when like leading up to like the biggest segment of the fight between Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, there is that moment where they get cut off from each other in the lasers beams, force
Yeah.
field things, and Qui-Gon goes into that meditation.
Mhm.
I think about that all the time. It's
That is
so
so cool.
it that like adds everything to his character for me. Like I don't know, it's just this like it's the a little moment, but it just says so much in the way that Darth Maul is like he's so like seething and pacing, like so animalistic in that way. But Qui-Gon just like fully connects with the Force. It's just yeah, that's one of my favorite moments probably in like all of Star Wars. It's so good.
Yeah, Maul is like a cat, he's just, like, going
Mhm.
back and forth, and honestly, this is, again, where the novelization shines because I didn't realize what the heck Qui-Gon was doing. I'm like, "Why is he getting on his knees and, like, sleeping?" At the
Right.
time, I didn't really understand what meditation really was because we didn't really have that introduction up
Mhm.
until that point. I mean, you think about it as far as the original trilogy goes, and, it talked about being one with the Force and yada, 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 but nobody ever really, like, meditated per se. That was more of a
Right.
prequel thing. So, yeah, so that was definitely a new one for me, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Jay
that's
stole
so
the
true.
words right out of my mouth. I was about to bring up that
Mhm.
scene in the novelization as well, because I remember Terry Brooks describing it as Maul pacing back and forth like a caged panther or something like that. And that was such
Mhm.
a really great way of describing it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. The last question before we get into the segment, Kara, is who is your favorite character from the Phantom Menace?
Oh, that's hard too. I really have a thing for I love Captain Panaka a lot. I don't even really know why. I just think he's so uh I mean, maybe it's like mostly headcanon that I'm giving him because in the movie he's really just like grumpy and angry about everything and stressed out just like to the max. But I feel like the loyalty of all the new Naboo like soldiers that we see, I don't know, like I just really like Panaka a lot. Besides Panaka, probably Shmi though. She's incredible and
Mhm.
just ugh. I think Pernilla, the actress, does such a good job, and uh, yeah. I would say maybe Shmi is first, and then Captain Panaka is second.
Nice. And, there's been so much more supportive material that has come out about Panaka since this
Right,
movie that you can't help but to just like the guy so much.
it's
And
true.
so I'm with you. Yeah, he's a great character.
He would not have been on my bingo card for someone to pick. So I like that. Kudos to you.
Nice.
I think I also like him partially because Hugh Corshey's really cute, but
Of course.
Well, he gets some good moments in this segment, so we'll get a chance to talk
He
about him.
does.
true.
Mhm.
All right, so let's dive into this segment. Jay, as you were alluding to earlier, this one runs from 21 minutes and 34 seconds to 31 minutes and 41 seconds. And it all kicks off at Theed Palace with Seo Bibble asking Nute Gunray how he plans on explaining this to the Senate. And Gunray basically doesn't hide the fact that he's manipulated everything. He's like, yeah, we're going to sign a treaty and the Senate's going to ratify it. And then boom, everything's kosher. Queen immediately says, nope, not going to cooperate. And Nute Gunray threatens her with the suffering of her people. And then Gunray has the droids take them away to be processed. So, Kara, if there was any illusions that Nute Gunray is like a sympathetic character,
Mm.
they really get wiped out here. But what do you
True.
take on Nute Gunray overall?
The whole Federation thing, I mean, it's hard to like after with like you said with all the like supplemental stuff that we've seen, it's hard to like remember how crazy it was when this first came out that it was kind of like dense, like politically dense what they were talking about. Um I mean it's like is it just evidence of Palpatine's like manipulation or is it just like the Trade Federation? I because I still get confused. Like the Trade Federation and the Separatists are different things or the same thing.
Well,
Right.
you're right. It is so politically dense.
You
And,
know?
and for a lot of us that, I mean, obviously it's called Star Wars, it's about wars and stars.
Yes.
But, for me, I know, especially with this movie, it was almost like watching episodes of The Peanuts where all of the adults are talking like wah 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 lightsabers, wah 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 wah. Oh, isn't her dress pretty? So for the longest time, the whole idea of like what you're talking about, Trade Federation versus separatists versus this versus that, just completely went over my head. You at the core of it, you understood that Naboo was basically being held hostage and there
Yes.
was a reason, and it was all about, Palpatine and his machinations and what was going on, with Sidious. Not Palpatine, because we weren't supposed to know
Right.
that they were one and the same at the time. But as far as that goes, again, with the supplemental material, I still credit Lego Star Wars for helping me to understand a lot of what was going on in here and playing that stinking video game. And then I will give kudos to the Queen's Hope, Queen's Peril trilogy of books by E.K. Johnston, in that it helped me to understand when you just said, Dennis, about taking them away to be processed. And they were talking about which camps they were going to be led to. And then you see, the queen and them going through the streets and these different kind of herds, that it really hit home for me at that point that, oh my gosh, like this is really what was happening. And there was actually war camps going on. And you don't really get that from this. So I completely understand what you're saying, like how dense it is and how much is going on.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot, but it was clear that he's a bad guy, I guess.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and I gotta admit, for the first time, I think, breaking down this segment in my notes to prepare for this is when I really realized that how much threatening Nute Gunray is doing here. A lot, as you guys are suggesting, that this kind of went over my head, and then this, of course, will impact a later scene in the movie when Padmé is reviewing the message from Seo Bibble about the suffering is catastrophic and stuff like that. That you can see why she would be so eager to believe it, because she was just threatened with it herself here in this scene. So I think it's an understated scene in this movie.
For sure.
The action then continues in the streets of Theed. So the queen and her handmaidens and several of the guards are being led away to be processed, and we get to see the droids herding various citizens around the street, very orderly, I might add. Theed actually held up pretty well for having just gone through an invasion. And this is when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan sneak up on them and ambush with Jar Jar's quote-unquote help. He kind of stumbles out the window. But I absolutely love that Qui-Gon has this movie where he slashes a few droids, and then as he's putting it back on his side, he deactivates it like all in one motion. Guards take the weapons, and then they go off for some introductions where Qui-Gon introduces himself and Obi-Wan as ambassadors. Seo Bibble says, well, your negotiations failed. Qui-Gon does not lose his temper, says negotiations never took place. We need to contact the communications. We need to contact the Republic. All communication's been knocked out, and they need to go find a transport. So this is as good time as any, Cara, to ask you your thoughts on Jar Jar.
Yeah. I mean, I love Ahmed Best so much that I like look at them as one and the same. So whenever I think of Jar Jar, I'm just thinking of like just technical innovation and how incredible. I can't think of it like outside of that. But as far as the character, it's so funny because especially this scene, I remember getting a little bit sucked into the black hole of like Darth Jar Jar conspiracies. And I remember watching at least one video where they said that this was this moment when they fall is like a sign that he has the force, because like he wouldn't have been able to survive the fall otherwise.
Oh boy.
So that's one of the things I think about. It was a video that was breaking down all of his like kind of fumbling movements that accidentally end up helping in a way, and they were comparing it to like drunken boxing.
Oh yeah, Drunken Master. I think I've seen that video
exactly.
as well. Yeah,
which was very interesting. But I love Jar Jar. I love the comedic relief of him. I love his loyalty, and his anxiety is also incredibly relatable, similar to 3PO's anxiety. It's like I relate more to them than I do to like the super brave like R2 heroes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to your point too, as far as a couple of things. One, with Jar Jar, kind of makes me think about the fact that we have Yoda, who before we knew that he was Yoda, and he was kind of fumbling and bumbling and teasing Luke with mine, 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 all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got the Ewoks, who are small and kind of unprovoking in their own way until they prove to be formidable. Then you've got the Porgs that are little and kind of annoying. But then Jar Jar has a different stature. He's tall, he's tall and he's lanky. So I think sometimes we don't really excuse, quote unquote, those of larger stature for being so fumbling and bumbling. We can almost excuse it more with smaller beings because, oh, they're cute and they're small and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if that's part of why maybe Jar Jar was so not accepted by a lot of people, just because he was kind of an oxymoron unto himself. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah.
And but I do think I'm with you when you say, like, you can relate to him as well, because I think there's a little bit of Jar Jar in all of us. I'm sorry, but I do. And the other thing too, Dennis, to your point, when you were talking about how Theed really looked like it held up well in this invasion, and that's why I think when I watched The Phantom Menace for the first, like, umpteen times, that I didn't really get the gravity of what was going on with this invasion, is because it did look very prim and pristine still. And I think that was purposefully done because, George Lucas had already done the gritty and the dirty with the original trilogy. You know what I mean? And this is kind of a different feel. So I'm wondering if that was intentional.
Mm.
But it does kind of miss the mark as far as feeling how serious this was, because everything was so pristine.
Right, right. Yeah, that might be a criticism I have of this movie, which is that we are told about how dire this invasion is, but we never really see it. We're just being told
Right.
that over the course of the movie.
Mhm.
Either one of you get a little annoyed with C.O. Bibble when he basically just gets in Qui-Gon's face. It's like, your negotiations have failed. Well, what did you manage to accomplish, buddy?
Well, I think, CO, he, from the very beginning, he seemed like he was a lot more almost saving face than anything else. This can't be happening. Hasn't happened in 1,000 years. And, so he's got to lay the blame on somebody. But yeah, he was a little bit annoying when like you said, your negotiations failed,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. But Kara, what do you think?
Yeah, Bibble's like a really interesting character, like to kind of show what the government is like in Naboo. And it's so interesting, like it plays against what you expect, that their ruler is a really young woman, so then all the people around her like playing their part, but yeah, I think he's just it's like there's a lot of characters in the movie, whether it's Jar Jar or Panaka or Bibble, that are just really stressed out, and it's very relatable, and it gives a great contrast to how calm Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon always seem to be.
Mhm, mhm, and I think too that Naboo hasn't had this kind of strife that they've really had to deal with in a very long time, because
True.
they have had peace for so long, and they have kind of enjoyed affluency and sort of this, status quo kind of life for so long.
Very much so. All right. So they head off to the hangar, and we see that the droids have rounded up all the pilots and have got them sitting in the corner. Qui-Gon tells Amidala, hey, you need to go to Coruscant with me. And she is reluctant. Of course, we now know this was the decoy. And then, Qui-Gon says, well, the Trade Federation is probably going to kill you if you stay. C.O. Bibble is, again, outraged. They wouldn't dare. Panaka says, they need her to sign the treaty. So everyone around Amidala is all aggravated by this. And this is where the whole notion of a Phantom Menace starts to creep in, because Qui-Gon says there's something else behind this. There is no logic behind the Trade Federation's move, and his feelings say they will destroy her if she stays.
Mm.
So C.O. Bibble starts to relent, and they need the Senate, and Palpatine's going to need her help if they're going to get relief there on Naboo. Amidala then subtly turns to her handmaidens and basically says, either choice presents great danger to us all. And that's when she kind of looks over at Padmé, who responds, we are brave, Your Highness. Which, again, on an initial viewing, I think is kind of an understated moment, but on subsequent viewings, when you're looking for this stuff, it was really quite clever, the way they're talking here. So, Amidala relents and says that, fine, I'll go plead my case to the Senate. So before we get on to the action here, Kara, you said you didn't really remember your first viewing of this movie because you were young, but do you remember at all your first couple, knowing whether or not Amidala and Padme were the same person going into this movie?
It's so funny because I feel like as a young kid, I did not understand what was going on there, and I don't know if it was because I could tell that it was not Natalie, like, I knew Natalie Portman's face well enough that, I wasn't tricked, but I didn't understand that it was supposed to be a trick, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, and my brother always says that I didn't know that Palpatine was the Emperor, and that when because we saw Revenge of the Sith at midnight, he says that I was, like, so shocked. But I have no memory of actually not knowing that they were, the same person. So I feel like I feel like it might have confused me a little bit as a kid. Um, but it's a really cool part of Padme's story, and um it tells a lot about Naboo as well. And I just love those sunset colored handmaiden costumes are like so iconic. And yeah, but I feel like part of me always knew that something didn't make sense to me there, because I feel like when she comes out at the end and is like, I'm Queen Amidala, I was like, well, yeah.
How
Right,
about
yeah.
you, Jay? Did you know
Spoiler
that
alert.
going into the movie?
Well, of course, I was quite a bit older when I saw this for the first time, so I feel like I picked up on that pretty quickly. But Carrie, you're really inspiring me to ask my own niece if she has any recollection, because I took her to see this when she was 6. And it
Ooh.
was, yeah, and it was her first movie in the theater. So kind of being around that same age, you were around 8, she was around 6. I wonder if she made any connection or put like 2 and 2 together between the 2 of them. I just feel like I always felt that there was some sort of a give and take between all of them. Like they were all queen and they were all handmaidens, and that they were meant to look so much alike that whoever needed to step up could step up. And
Mhm.
that's kind of the way that we get it, but of course we know that, Padme is the queen, and the rest of them just all had specialized skills, which again is where a lot of the comics and the supplemental materials really shine in really giving individuality to all of the handmaidens, which I love. And, I definitely have some of my favorites, and going forward kind of, the little nod and the wink of like, oh, okay, so that's how that happened, and it was because of that and that handmaiden. But
Mhm.
but yeah. So really quickly though, before we move on, Dennis, I know we have asked our guests before what or who they thought the Phantom Menace actually was. Like, what does the Phantom Menace actually mean? So,
Ooh.
you know what I mean? So, Kara, do you have any recollection at the time? Like, did you put 2 and 2 together, or, what do you think it is now? How would you categorize that? How would you define it?
What I think it is now is definitely Sidious
Mhm.
and the Sith as a whole, but mostly him. I feel like when I was younger, I probably just thought it was like the bad guy, so I probably thought it was Darth Maul.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, like, well, oh, well, he's the bad guy, so he must be the menace. He's menacing them. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, at this point, I definitely feel like it's Sidious though.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always interesting to see what everybody's take on that is and how they interpret that.
Mm.
Well, stick a pin in that because it's going to come up again when we
Mhm.
see Sidious in this segment. So,
All right.
right. So the Jedi spring into action here. Qui-Gon wanders up to the lead battle droid and says he is ambassador for the Supreme Chancellor. And he's taking these people to Coruscant. And the droid's like, "What? Who are you?" And you're taking them where? That doesn't compute, and you're under arrest. And then Qui-Gon does the reverse of that really cool maneuver I was talking about in the prior scene, where he ignites his lightsaber as he's pulling it off his hip and just slices that droid right in half. Love that. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan is busy taking care of the droids that were guarding the pilots. And this is like the third time in this movie where he does that little jump split kick maneuver.
So good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember it clearly the first time it shows up in this movie, like right off the beginning, when he's boarded the Train Federation ship with Qui-Gon, and they're leaving the conference room. It's been filled up for gas, but it's like, wow, this is used more frequently than I thought. So anyway, that's there. Obi-Wan frees the pilots, and then they all board Amidala's ship, and it takes off. So again, I love this segment because it's like touching on almost every part of this movie, or the different components of this movie, I should say. So battle droids, Kara, what do you think about them here compared to places like the Clone Wars?
It's such a great design. So that's like always the first thing that I always think of, like the Doug Chang concept art for them, like they're just so interesting to look at, but they're also so easy to
Mhm.
just ruin, disintegrate, because they're so like fragile, and they feel so bony, but I feel like they get a lot goofier as we get into animation, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And I definitely never thought that they were very intimidating, because they are so, like, you could just give a swift kick to the lower, and they'll probably go down. But it's interesting to see them now, knowing how like progressively goofy they get going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's funny because when you think about going forward into when we see them in the Battle of Naboo and you just see so many of them getting loaded off of those droid carriers, they're
Mhm.
more intimidating there than they are even here. So I feel like if we would have gotten introduced to them on a larger scale like that and then maybe pulled back a little bit more, that some of that intimidation factor may have stayed with them a little bit more, question mark, but I'm not really sure. But yeah, I'm with you. We've talked about that too, Dennis and I, how they definitely get a little goofier. But okay, I have a question for you guys though. But did you notice I was paying particular attention to the pilots this time as they were being freed? And
Mhm.
did either of you notice how as they were sitting there, they were just kind of taking it all in, and they didn't seem phased at all that these two Jedi were just completely going at it with their lightsabers. They were just kind of there.
Yeah. I get the feeling that's probably about the way this was shot,
Mhm.
because we all know, George Lucas is like brags about how much like everything is digitally altered in these movies. And so I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they were filmed separately from Ewan McGregor in that
Ah,
scene. And then the
I
whole
wouldn't
thing
be
was
either.
stitched back together, and that's the reaction that they had recorded for them. So, but I
that's
did want to
funny.
revisit the issue about the battle droids real quick. This is really, they really are the prequel version of the stormtroopers, because the stormtroopers are faceless. They all look the exact same thing, and that's one of the things that is not terrifying about them, but intimidating about them, because you can shoot one and another one shows up that looks just like them. And Jay, the point you were making about having so many of them, especially in that battle, is yeah, you can shoot one, but then there's another one right behind it that looks exactly like it. A few of them have some different paint on them to designate rank, but it really is the faceless enemy that can be demoralizing. Because how many we killed? I don't know. There's 4 more, like the one I just shot.
Yeah.
So I do like that aspect of them, and I think it is a subtle echo of what we see in the stormtroopers from the original trilogy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I feel like similarly to stormtroopers, and like what Jay was saying, they are scariest because they are just like, there's just so many. It's the number. And stormtroopers definitely had that effect too. It's just like, one on one they might be kind of clumsy and not as intimidating, but when there's like 500 of them, that's that's definitely scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So they take off, and they are heading out of the atmosphere and towards the Trade Federation blockade. Obi-Wan tells Jar Jar to stay outside the cockpit, and we get to see the various astromech droids there, to which he greets, "Hello, boyos." They start to run the blockade, and the Federation opens fire on the ship and damages it. The astromechs go to work, including R2-D2. So there's our introduction of everyone's favorite astromech, Okay, that was presumptuous, but I'm assuming R2D2. The droids start getting picked off one by one until only R2D2 is left, and then he fixes the ship. And meanwhile, Ric Olie is narrating everything R2D2 is doing. So I want to start with this. This went around not too long ago, and now I cannot watch this movie without seeing it. Everything Ric Olie says in this movie is just like observing everything that's happening.
He's the Legolas of the movie.
Yeah.
They're getting picked off. That little droid's rerouting the power. He did it. It's you see it and he tells you about it. And it's kind of like, we're going through the drive-thru. We're ordering McDonald's. I got a cheeseburger. I mean, it's the same type of thing with this character. And so I don't want to completely dismiss the character because I do like him. But what do you all think of Rick?
Sure, I'll let you take this one. I'll let you go first.
I feel like it's a necessary role. Like, it's never bothered me with Legolas the way it does for some people, that he will say things that are like happening right in front of like tell don't show type thing. But I don't know. It doesn't bother me. It's just, to me, it's just another like vaguely silly element of the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, I will agree with you on that one. And I almost wonder if he's almost more of a placeholder. I hate to say that, but that's kind of how I feel about him in terms of just why he's narrating his way through this whole thing. And as you were saying, Dennis, it kind of just sets up this really tiered introduction to R2D2, basically. It's kind of like the funneling towards, okay, and here comes R2 kind of thing. And I know, Dennis, you've heard me say this before, but Kara, I always think, when I think of Ric Olie, I always think of Ricola, and I can't not think of that every time I see him. So yeah, sorry if I ruined him for you too, but that's just where my brain goes.
I always think of my friends Jason and Gabe from the podcast Blast Points. They call him Slick Rick.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. I think some narration or some exposition about what R2D2 is doing and accomplishing is needed in this scene. But I think,
because he can't talk, right? So.
Right. But at the same time, it's just like, it was a little too on the nose. It's like, we're never going to get, I mean, I think might have gone better if something along the lines of like, we're never going to get out here unless that power gets restored. And, we're doomed. And then all of a sudden R2 repairs it. Like, I can't believe the droid did. That would make more sense to me as opposed to, now he's headed out, it was just, like I said, it was just a bit on the nose. And then it only gets worse because his later dialogue is the exact same type of thing. But okay, enough picking on Rick aside, because I really do like the blockade running scene of this movie.
Oh, yeah.
They get past the blockade. R2D2 is the last droid standing, successfully fixes the ship, or at least repairs it enough that they can make their escape. And they're getting ready to go to hyperspace, but they never actually do. They find out that they only have enough power to get to Tatooine, and Panaka gets grumpy again, Kara, and says, you can't take a Royal Highness there. The Hunts are gangsters. And, to which Qui-Gon points out, yep, but the difference is the Hutts aren't looking for her. So, neat way to get to Tatooine, kind of establishes a whereabout in the galaxy for the extent that it matters. Naboo is in comparison. I mean, we know Tatooine is, as Luke once pointed out, is if there's a bright center to the galaxy, you're on the planet that it's farthest from. And Naboo's not too far from that. Okay, so not a whole lot to talk about there, but since we did get some dialogue of Panaka, what did you think about this plan?
I don't blame him for the fear of the Hutts. I feel like we've seen more and more of that, especially like even in Book of Boba Fett and stuff like that. But I do think Qui-Gon's totally right. Like, if they're not looking for her, then that's going to make it easier for them. I'm so curious about, like, I don't know if it's me looking for something that isn't there, or if it's just like a story point and I'm trying to make more of it. But part of me is like, why, like, how how did they end up on Tatooine, and then everything that happens? The chance of it, or was it the Force, or was it Palpatine? Like, you know what I mean? Am I just looking for something there that's not there, and they just ended up there because it's where they were? I don't
Got
know.
got thoughts, Jay, on that one?
All of the above.
Right?
Right? No, seriously. I do think, I mean, if you're a big believer in the way of the Force and the will of the Force, then I think that that's definitely a big part of that. There are definitely a lot of people out there that believe that this was all, the part of the long game that Palpatine was playing, and that somehow he was able to manipulate things in his favor for this to work out in this way. So, I think everything happens for a reason, and that's kind of what my life always seems to fall into, the old adage of, but it happened the way that it needed to. Let's just put it that way, I guess.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think this is where you kind of get into the quagmire of dealing with the prophecy of the chosen one.
Mhm.
Aha.
Because when they get to Tatooine, and we're not gonna meet Anakin here in this segment, it'll kick off the next one that we do next month. But they get to Tatooine and they meet Anakin, and Qui-Gon senses how he's different, and then takes a measure of his midi-chlorians, and it's like, oh, never seen a level like this. Must be the chosen one. And so you can then from there say it was the will of the Force that we got here. We met the chosen one. He's going to bring balance to the Force, even though we're not entirely certain it's actually out of balance at the moment.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, it's kind of like, I think I think that's what generates your confusion, Kara, because it's like, is it all because they're meant here because we have this prophecy? Well, what if that prophecy didn't exist?
Mhm.
Right.
Would Qui-Gon have been so adamant that Anakin is important? And so, there's no real answer to that question when it comes
Mm.
down to it. And so I don't know. I find prophecies to be very tricky things because I think in the act of interpreting them, you're also looking for the solution, and therefore sometimes creating the very
Yeah.
thing that the prophecy was predicting, as opposed to, the event happening and then relating it back to the prophecy. And so it's kind of, I don't know, there's a whole lot of predetermination type philosophy and stuff going on in there. But I think that is kind of the trick of handling, prophecies is it happening because it was prophesized, or because you're bending events because it's been prophesized?
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's the same thing with, reading horoscopes or even looking at a fortune cookie.
Mhm.
You could say, "Oh, yeah, that kind of fits. I can see where this horoscope is telling me what I'm doing today or what's going to happen tomorrow," because you are kind of looking for that. And, one thing about Qui-Gon too is, as we've kind of learned since then, Qui-Gon was very much sort of obsessed, if you will, with prophecy
Mhm.
and with, predicting what the will of the Force and the chosen one and all of this and all of that. So, again, to your point is, was he seeing that because he wanted to?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get back to the Trade Federation, and Nute Gunray is meeting with Darth Sidious via holo transmission. Sidious asks, see, I'm having to be careful here because I keep wanting to say Palpatine. And in fact, I had to
I know.
redo my notes here because I kept writing Palpatine when we don't know that. We haven't met
Right.
Palpatine yet in this movie. It is Darth Sidious. But anyway, Sidious asks if Queen Amidala has signed the treaty. Gunray sheepishly explains that she disappeared and one Naboo cruiser got past the blockade. And you could see that micro cringe. He's
Mhm.
expecting to get wrath unleashed upon him. But Sidious then introduces Darth Maul and says, he will find your lost ship. And to which, when they fall off screen, is it Rune Haake, or I can't remember which one of them says, this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them. So when we were talking about the Phantom Menace just a moment ago, it occurs to me that most of the instances in this movie where we see Darth Sidious is as a holotransmission, which has got
Ooh.
a very Phantom-like quality to it. And up until a balcony scene with him and Maul, he really does kind of show up as a Phantom, and he is the menace behind everything going on.
That is a very good point. I didn't think about that with the whole holo transmission thing. Good call.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But what did you all think about Maul's introduction here?
Oh, it's a great first look at him. He looks so big. Like he looks very large. And I feel like Ray Park is like a medium-sized guy, but he in that like imposing standing behind the seated Sidious, he just looks so big.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Massive.
Well, he looks strong. He
Yes.
looks like very powerful because he is very ramrod straight, standing up behind Sidious.
Mm.
So yeah, there's definitely something to that.
And he was brand new as a villain as well. We'd never seen anything like him before with the tattoos and, just the embellishments that he had. And Carrie, you're right. I mean, with him standing behind Sidious, he looked larger than life and very, menacing, if you will, to pardon the pardon the borrowing of the term from the title of the movie, but he did.
Yeah. And also harkens back to when you look at some of the documentaries on the making of this movie, when George Lucas was asking some of the designers and to give me a picture of your worst nightmare, and clowns and people's children were showing up, and he asked them to go back to the drawing boards, like, it's a little too on the money here. We got some parents that are not getting some sleep, and so they had to redesign, and that's why we got Maul from this here. The other thing I wanted to ask about this scene is that or point out this is where the Trade Federation really starts to get the idea that they're out of their league, that they're in over their heads on this one, because that whole bit is like, wait a minute, there's two of them now. What in the world? How are we going to handle this? But okay, well then we'll move back on to Amidala's cruiser, and Panaka is presenting R2D2 to the Queen. And they basically say, it's a well-built droid. It's the one that saved us. It deserves our gratitude. So the Queen is preparing to dispatch Padmé to clean up R2D2. But before Padmé has a chance to leave with R2, this is when the whole plan of Tatooine comes up, and Qui-Gon asks for permission to go there. Panaka does not agree with this course of action, and then they're going to go there anyways. And then we get out into the hall, and we get to see Padmé cleaning up R2D2, and this is when Jar Jar meets her. So, what do y'all think about that? The decoy sending the Queen out to clean up the droid.
I am so distracted by my thoughts about R2's origin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so like, especially like this like watch through. I was just thinking, like, do we know where R2 came from before this, or this is just like his beginning? That's what I was thinking about.
That's a good question.
Like,
I
what
don't.
what droid factory did he come from? Or,
Yeah.
was he just sort of a stock model that was provided to all Nubian ships? Or yeah, that's a really great question, honestly. And Dennis and I have rolled around the idea, ha ha ha, R2 rolled around, that what if R2 didn't survive this particular flight with Padme's ship? What if he would have been one of the ones that would have gotten shot off of the hull? How would Star Wars history have been completely different? Isn't that crazy to think about?
Extremely.
Yeah. Yeah. But to your question, Dennis, I know for myself, I just thought that it was just further covering up the idea that Padme was actually the queen, almost to the point where, no one would believe ever that the queen would be the one that would be cleaning up this astromech, and what a lowly job for her to do. So we'll make her do it.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I also think it is Amidala / Padme being clever, whereas after they have this meeting, not everyone's going to be sitting around the Queen. The Panaka and Olie are going to be in the cockpit getting the ship to Tatooine, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are going to be, working on repairs, and basically everyone's got jobs. No one's going to be
Mhm.
sitting about but this gets Padme out of the Queen's chambers, and it puts her out amongst the rest of the crew where she can keep an eye on everything that's going on and
That
kind
is
of keep her ear open on this. As an aside, I pulled out the Star Wars book, which our friend Dan Zare was a co-author on, and I looked up the introduction to R2D2. It does not really answer our question about where R2D2 came from, except for it does say R2D2 begins his service life aboard Queen Amidala's royal starship. So it suggests that he does not really have too much of a history prior to this. So both him and C-3PO are essentially lifelong friends when it comes down to it. Okay, so Padmé and Jar Jar meet, and Jar Jar is his charming self, and hello, and she asks if he's a Gungan, and how'd you get there? And he goes, no, Misa day starting pity okie day with the brisky morning munchin. Then boom, getting very scared and grabbing that Jedi, and pow, Misa here. Huh. Misa getting very scared. So
Nice.
I transcribed that from the closed caption. What can I say? So
Good job.
thank you. So, I don't think we really get a chance to. Well, that's not true. We get a chance to appreciate this meeting because we just saw a couple scenes earlier. The way this movie changes scenes, the meeting between Boss Nass and Qui-Gon, where Nass was talking about how much they dislike the Naboo because they think their brains are so big, they think they're better than they are. But yet you've got Jar Jar reaching out, and you've got Padmé reciprocating that. And they're just having a conversation. It's like, oh, you're a Gungan, aren't you? And you can tell, has Padmé never met one before now, besides the fact that they spent their entire lives on the same planet?
That's what I wondered during this particular viewing as well. It's like, how does she not know he's a Gungan? They live on Naboo.
Yeah. I mean, are they just really that segregated that the Gungans spend almost all their times in their swamp and the Naboo stay away from there? Any thoughts?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I haven't read the Queen's Hope, Queen's insert blank here books. Do they mention the Gungans much? I'm curious.
I can't recall, but only one of those books spends like a super significant amount of time
on Naboo, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the first one, which is kind of a retelling of it's a telling of Padmé's rise to power, and then a retelling of everything that happens around the Phantom Menace from different points of view. Mainly the handmaidens, and then Padmé's when it's like she was a character when she wasn't on screen and the like. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never met a narwhal, but I know they exist in my world.
Yeah, and Padmé still knew they existed, but it's just it's just kind of like, oh, that's the first Gungan she got to meet. So
That's
interesting.
true.
And she's
either that or she was just, really awkward as well, kind of pointing out the obvious. Oh, are you a Gungan? Kind of thing.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
to
they
make
hit it
him
off.
feel at ease. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, so the ship comes out of Lightspeed. They land near the outskirts of a settlement, so as not to attract attention. We know that'll be Mos Espa. Qui-Gon kind of adopts a little bit of a disguise, not so on the nose Jedi, who puts on a poncho. And Obi-Wan explains that the hyperdrive is gone. They're going to need to replace it. And Qui-Gon is like, hey, be mindful. I'm sensing a disturbance of the Force, which Obi-Wan notices as well. And Qui-Gon reminds Obi-Wan not to let them send any transmissions so that they can't be traced.
Right.
Okay, so unless there's any observations there, I really want to get, because we're starting to run long, I want to get to the next scene.
Yeah.
Okay, so we see Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and R2D2 making their way towards the settlement. And then all of a sudden from behind them, you hear Panaka telling her to wait, and that the Queen has commanded that they take her handmaiden with them. And because she's curious about the planet. And Qui-Gon does not like this at all. What did you make of that the Queen is issuing commands through Panaka to the Jedi?
I think it's great because I know that it's just Padmé being like being stubborn and she just wants to go. So she's really the one that's demanding it. And I think it's cool that, like, kind of what you were saying with sending her to clean R2 means that she'll have her ears in a different area of the ship, and it's like, what better way to keep your eyes on the what's going on with this little dispatch than to go with them.
Yep, that's exactly my thought too, and that if Padme would have gone under her own pretenses as queen, then they never would have allowed it because it would have been
Right.
way too dangerous. But at least this way, she seems to be more quote unquote expendable.
See, I'm good with all of that part of it. It's just the notion, especially after the fact, how we got to know Padme in the Clone Wars and other subsequent material that we keep referring to, issuing commands to the Jedi. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess I don't know of any other way that she could have talked her way into this position, but it just seems very out of character for her, especially, the relationship she has with all the different Jedi, whether they're friends and of course, what she's got going on with Anakin. I just not used to seeing her issue commands like that to people who really aren't under her control. And so I don't know. It just stood out to me. That's like, I don't think you can actually command them to do anything
Well,
when it
here's
comes
a
down to.
thought though. Maybe the way that Panaka said it is that Panaka says the queen commanded it, that please take the handmaiden with you. The queen commanded she go. Did she command the Jedi to take her, or did she just simply quote unquote command that a handmaiden go? Like she gave the command to the handmaiden. You know what I mean? And that it just
Mm.
so happened that she was going with the Jedi.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Panaka says it to Qui-Gon is, or take the handmaiden with you. The queen commands it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I
Qui-Gon's
see where you're
response is,
going.
no more
Yeah.
commands from the Queen or Highness
Gotcha.
today.
Yeah.
And so, I that was very polite of Qui-Gon
It
in,
was.
to return that. And yeah, I mean, it's the thing I guess I can figure, if you're Padme, how else are you, Padme / Amidala, how else are you going to get her out there? You
Hmm.
know,
Right.
please take my handmaiden. No. Why is it so important? Well, she's not, it's, the queen doesn't actually have to issue anything to Qui-Gon's face this way. And they're already outside and halfway to Mos Espa. Qui-Gon's not going to turn around and storm back up the ramp and say, who do you
Yeah.
think you are? He's either going to say no, or he's going to relent. And in this case, he relented. But I think, we kind of come find out later in the movie that Qui-Gon was onto her all along.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And so I don't think this is really fooling him, and so he just kind of gets on with it. So, and maybe it's because he's keeping up the ruse, because he knows
Mhm.
while Padme is with him, he can protect the queen. But again, why couldn't Obi-Wan do that? So
True.
just thoughts.
I wonder if it also made them look a little less conspicuous to have like a third person with them and to have a a woman with them. Like maybe that made them look a little bit. I don't know. I guess it's hard to blend in Mos Espa, but
Dilutes Jar Jar's presence a little bit, probably.
Yeah.
true.
It's a good way to look at it. Dilutes it. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So did you notice Natalie Portman's limp in that scene?
Never.
Yeah, apparently she had, I think, sprained her ankle prior to shooting that.
Aw.
And if you watch the wide angle when she's walking up with Panaka to Qui-Gon and Jar Jar and R2, one of her legs is rather stiff, and she's kind of not
Aw.
dragging it, but she's definitely got a limp going on there.
Interesting. I never picked up on that. I guess I just
Me
figured it
either.
was just because it was hard to walk in sand.
Yeah. Okay, so this last little bit I threw in here so we could get to the 10-minute mark and also just talk about Mos Espa a bit. So, they walk into Mos Espa. Qui-Gon's explaining how it's mainly moisture farms and the like there. It's a haven for people that don't want to be found. Padme responds like us. Jar Jar steps in it, literally.
Literally. Yeah.
And then they decide to head off to one of the smaller deals, which will be Watto's shop. And so I also noticed this time, like, how far behind R2 is falling, and no one seemed to care. He was just falling farther and farther behind.
That's true. Although he kind of sticks out also being this astromech droid,
Hmm.
kind of with this ragtag bunch of people. But I know for me, I don't know about the two of you, but it just hit me how young Natalie Portman looks in this
Oh,
scene. She's just
yeah,
so young.
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely.
Well, she was recently on the cover of Vanity Fair, and they were highlighting her and some other actors that had made a difference. And, the three gentlemen were all in tuxedos, and she was in this really striking dress. And it was like I saw this like right after I'd seen the scene. I was like, oh my god, that's the same person. It's been okay, all right,
Very
but
stark contrast, huh?
yeah, indeed. Okay, so that brings us there to the end of that segment. Either one of you have any other final thoughts on that 10 minutes of the film?
I think the Naboo starfighter is maybe one of my favorite ships.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
I just love it. The chrome. Oh my god.
Oh, yeah. It's so pretty.
Um,
And that's I meant to say too, when they were first coming into the hangar, there is such a great shot of the way that they're looking into the hangar, and you just see that beautiful chrome
mm,
of the underside of the wing as they're coming through, and I was like, "Oh gosh, that is such a cinematic, beautiful shot right there." That's very cool.
gorgeous too.
Did
yeah.
you notice that there was a couple of things that were sort of like poetry? We always say, Star Wars is like poetry, it rhymes. There was at one point, C.O. Bibble said, "There are too many of them." And I was like, "Oh, where are we? Oh, wait, that was in episode 3 with the little Padawan. There are too many of them."
Yeah. Well, and it's
Mm.
kind of like the opposite Millennium Falcon, which was the first time we see that. What a hunk of junk! And this is the gorgeous starship sitting in the hangar under different circumstances, and they have to blast their way out of both of those instances.
Ah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
Mm.
I really thought that ship was going to be the Millennium Falcon of the prequels, and so I was really kind of
Mm.
surprised never to see it after this movie. Never, in the movies.
Mhm, mhm.
But if you
Nice.
read the Darth Vader comics, you know what ended up happening to it. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, not good. Let's leave it at that. Okay, well then, that brings us to the end of the end of the segment. Cara, thank you so much for joining us for this. Before you
Course.
leave, please let everybody know where your various projects can be found and how they can connect with you online.
Yeah, best place to find me is always Instagram. I have all my links in my bio. You can get everywhere you need to be from there. But I'm on Patreon at Into a Larger World. My podcast is called Into a Larger World. Always talking to fans about their stories. I've got some celebration themed episodes hopefully coming soon because the 25th anniversary of the first celebration is in April. And I'm digging into tons of celebration history and stuff. If you were at a celebration and you want to tell me about it, send me an email. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Such a
Excellent.
cool project too, and your fanzines are just incredible.
Thank you.
So if those of you that are listening have not checked that out, you've got to go follow Kara on Instagram and check out all the cool stuff that she does.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, there you have it. That was our discussion on the third part of the Phantom Menace. And I know we say this like every month, but I just absolutely love doing these shows. Jay, it is
Mhm.
so much fun to get into this. We create an outline about what happens in that 10 minutes, and then inevitably some detail pops up that we end up spending like 5 minutes, 10 minutes on. And you're just like, how did we do that? Where did that come from?
Oh, yeah, and just having another fresh set of eyes and ears, and especially someone like Kara who is, much younger, and their first introduction to Star Wars was at a different time in their lives, than it was for us, and as far as the experience with Phantom Menace specifically. And so I just love the fact that all of those things lend themselves to these amazing discussions, and I just yeah, having so much fun. I know we both are.
Yep. So we hope you enjoyed her appearance because we are definitely going to have her back at the not too distant future. We've already got
Mhm.
something else lined up with her, so you can be on the lookout for that in just a couple months, as a matter of fact. So, with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and the third installment, as I've said previously, in the Phantom Menace series. And if you've enjoyed the episode, we hope you'd consider subscribing to Podcast Stardust if you haven't done so already on your podcatcher of choice. I'd also like to remind you that you can find our entire catalog of shows over on retrozap.com. We've been around for a long time now. It's hard to find everything that's preceded the last couple hundred episodes on most podcatchers, but they are there on retrozap.com. And that's also home to a bunch of other great podcasts that are covering everything from the MCU to DC, Star Trek, and a whole lot more. And the Doomcast recently revived itself, and they've been diving into details of the movie. So go check that out. As always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews. They are one of the best ways to help support the show. And you can do that by heading to someplace like Apple Podcasts and leaving a brief review, or Spotify now has ratings and reviews available as well. So any of those places are a great place to help us out. And we'd also appreciate you sharing the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. Word of mouth is always a great way to help us get noticed by others. So with that having been said, Jay, remind everybody what our social media contacts are again.
Absolutely. So we are very easily and conveniently found at Podcast Stardust on all the socials, including Facebook, Instagram, and X. And as Dennis was saying, we really do appreciate sharing the show out. And I know our listenership and our friendship has definitely grown, and that is thanks to all of you. And you can continue to do that on places like YouTube as well, where we have 2 different YouTube channels now. So we have the regular YouTube feed as well as the YouTube music feed. And so we've been getting a lot of great feedback over there, as well as a lot of interaction. And you can always hit us up on our Pinterest boards, which has all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And if you're up for some real-time chatter, you can always head to our Discord room, which is part of the Retrozep Discord server. So the link for that will be in our show notes, but you can always go straight to our show page and click on the community tab, and you are there. And then we also have a TeePublic store. And once again, the link for that will be in our show notes, but you can hit us up for all kinds of fun apparel and home goods. We have 7 different show logo designs available. And last but not least, we are also very much enjoying our collaboration with Saber Masters, where right now you can get a 2-for-1 deal on the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0 from Saber Masters. So if you head to sabermasters.com, check that out. And if you do happen to pick something up, make sure that you enter the code Stardust at checkout, and you will also receive an additional $10 off. And that also helps to support the show. So again, the link for that will also be in our show notes, all kinds of things in our show notes. So with that, Dennis, I know you've got some very exciting things rising on the horizon right now. So why don't you fill everybody in on that and what you got coming up?
Sure. So my wife and I are eagerly waiting the debut of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery. And when that happens, we'll be covering it on Warp Trails, which is our Star Trek podcast exclusive to the Retrozap podcast feed. So either look for the feed on your podcatcher choice or just go to retrozap.com. You can find all of our prior episodes there. Jay, I know we are on the verge of cosplay Mageddon for you. So what is the latest there?
I love that cosplay Mageddon. But yeah, April is going to be jam-packed in such a fun way. So I am very busy right now finishing up my original concept Mandalorian and having a blast learning all kinds of new techniques and procedures and everything with the build. And I've been collaborating with a lot of really fun makers as well. So you'll have to check all of that out on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And then here in the month of April, I've got a ton of different appearances from Fan Expo Cleveland to Hartville, Ohio, and Worcester, Ohio. So make sure you check out my feed and my stories for all the details. So again, that is at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Friday, we'll be discussing the latest from the Bad Batch. And on Monday, we'll be getting into Star Wars news, which will be featuring some stuff about the Acolyte. So, hey, come back for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, thanks for listening to episode 705 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.